Idaho, and I started realizing that Idaho is in a lot of trouble, not just because of the obvious reasons that we see with Governor Little, which, you know, the obvious signs are there, but it goes deeper than that. I can tell you that I have known Ammon's family since 2014. I was pretty new to Facebook, and I got quickly introduced to what we now call citizen journalists, and those people who may be on site when something's going on and they're recording and they're sharing what they're seeing. I saw some pretty scary things going on in Nevada with Ammon Bundy and his family. And so anyway, I think there was a reason why God wanted me to see that, and I believe it's because Ammon now is running for governor of Idaho, and people need to hear what he has to say and let him connect with you the way I have connected with his movement, who he is and what he and his family stood for and what he's doing now. I feel like Ammon is our hope, if not the only hope, to truly see Idaho become the republic that this country was founded to be, to become a sovereign state, to restore the values and the morals and the God-given principles that we were given when that Constitution was first created. And so, without further ado, Ammon, I would like to introduce Ammon Bundy.
All right, let's see if this mic will work. I have to bring it up. Can you hear me?
Yes.
That better?
Yep.
All right. I can speak louder if I have to, but so thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to just question and think about things. And I hope that we have a good conversation by the end of the night. I hope that we can be comfortable with each other during this conversation, to be able to express your thoughts, your concerns, to open up your minds and even your heart. I appreciated the opening prayer. Felt that that was exactly what should have been said, and I'm grateful for that, so thank you. I'm going to ask you just a couple questions at first. Who here has heard me speak before? Oh, good. I got you. I got a whole new room. The ratio has been about 3/4 is not heard and 3/4 has. We've been filling rooms and going all over Idaho. This is the third time around Idaho. First time here, but third time around Idaho. That RV, I bought it with 16,000 miles on it. I'm just turning 30,000 on it, so in just a few months. So we've been really, really busy. If you want more information, of course, there's these flyers. We also have a website that probably has too much information on it. It's at votebundy.com. There's just so much that's been happening. I've been interviewing with, now probably close to 100 different media outlets, national and state. We put those on there, and then all the news and then all the material. But the most important part of our website is the Keep Idaho, Idaho plan. So go to votebundy.com. It's pretty simple, votebundy.com. It's like an action request as well. And check it out. Share with your friends. If you think that after this conversation that we have, that I'm worth doing that, or that the efforts that I am putting forth are worth it. So with that being said, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about myself. I don't want to make too much about it, but I think that I need to try to gain your confidence a little bit of who I am, where I came from, so you can understand what makes me tick and, where maybe some of my thoughts came from. First of all, get backed up here. First of all, I want to lay a little bit of foundation now. I want to ask you a question. What is freedom? Can everybody see that okay? All right. So we talk about it, we pray about it, we think about it, we feel it in our hearts. Some of you even join the military to stand for it. Maybe the police forces for the same reason. But what is it? I have to admit that until I actually really had contemplated for a long time about it, I couldn't really define it. But I want to try to define it here. I'm going to present to you what I kind of settled on. But I want your opinion first, or your thoughts. You might give me a perspective, or most likely I'll bet we're probably all on the same page. Well, what is freedom? What is freedom?
From tyranny.
Freedom from tyranny? What do you mean by that?
You've got the bureaucratic tyranny going on for decades.
So to be free from that, from their control, from their power to try to control or influence your life. Okay? I have to agree with that. What else? What is freedom?
Freedom
Right
is
here.
not being fearful.
Okay. Fearful of what?
Not being able to speak, not able to bear arms, not too many taxes. It's like you're always living in fear of can you continue on?
Okay.
And that's more slavery
To
than
be
freedom.
to be free from that.
Right.
To not feel like that is upon you. To be free from that. Okay.
To me, it's a lot of, as an American, feeling like what's our government doing for us, not what they're going to do to us. So a lack of government intrusion, unnecessary intrusion in our day-to-day life and choices and decisions, they mean a lot.
Okay. All right. I certainly would have to agree with that.
I see it as a state of, a state that allows personal autonomy.
A state that allows personal autonomy. Meaning your life, your body, your life, your privacy, all of that is, I would certainly agree with that, right here.
Freedom to raise your children as you choose.
Ah, that's a good one. Absolutely. To raise your children as you choose, right here.
To come and go where you please, when you please.
To come and go where you want to, where you please, when you please. It's good, yeah. Was there another one? Right back here.
Me,
Yes.
exercise the dictates of your conscience before God.
That's good, to be able to exercise or worship, whatever you want, the dictates of your own conscience. Right back here.
Yes, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Okay? To have life, to be able to have liberty with that life, and to be able to pursue happiness. Those are some terms found in the Declaration of Independence. Okay, so I have not disagreed, and I don't disagree with anything that's being said. And I would disagree. If I felt like it wasn't within what I believed, I'd probably challenge you a little bit on it. We can have a conversation. I agree with everything that everybody said. Now I'm going to try to define it for you, okay? I'm going to at least try to sell you my definition of it. And that is, freedom is the ability to do whatever you want as long as you are not infringing upon another person's rights. Okay? Now, the examples here have already been really, really good. So, for example, freedom to worship. So how would we apply that in that definition? The freedom to worship whatever you want as long as you're not infringing upon another person's right. Right? Freedom to own private property. The freedom to do with your property that you want as long as you're not infringing upon your neighbor's rights or another person's rights. Right? Is that freedom being taken from us? Yeah. That's a pretty simple one, right? It's been an attack for a long, long time, under attack for a long, long time. Freedom to publish your thoughts. What's that called in the Constitution? Freedom of the press. Okay? To publish your thoughts. Look at the reporter raised his head. He looked. He said, "Oh, what are we talking about? The freedom to publish your thoughts." We have a reporter, maybe two here. We're grateful you're here. We want you to be able to publish your thoughts and continue to publish your thoughts. And we want to be able to publish our thoughts, right? Not be censored, cut off, labeled as a domestic terrorist simply because we don't agree with somebody. Okay? Freedom to travel, right? We want to be able to travel. We want to be able to decide when and where we want to go and how. Freedom to trade, and how do we define that? We should be able to travel, or let's say publish our thoughts. We should be able to publish our thoughts, any thoughts we want, as long as they don't infringe upon somebody else's rights. We should be able to trade with each other, willing buyer, willing seller, as long as we're not infringing upon someone's rights. Is that a right that's being infringed upon? Yeah, where's the role of government to try to profit off every transaction? That's not the purpose of government. We're supposed to have freedom of trade. Like when you decide you want something I have and I decide that I'll sell it to you and we agree, willing buyer, willing seller, there's no room for the government to profit off that. They're only supposed to protect that, to make sure that that trade can happen without somebody else interfering or stopping it or trying to manipulate it or coerce the trade. That's what the government's supposed to do. And in fact, we have really, really good examples of when our government in this land did that. And what did it do for us? What did it do for the people, for our forefathers? It created tremendous prosperity. They got out of the way and they began to trade freely and invent and do all of these things freely, and the government was just making sure that that was protected. And it created so much wealth that still today we benefit from it. We are still benefiting from that. And in fact, there's a figure that I like to use as an example. In 1905, the people of the United States made up about 5 to 6% of the world's population, but they were producing over 50% of the world's goods. Isn't that amazing? Because why? Because we were able to have free trade. We were able to trade with each other any way we want, as long as we did not infringe upon another person's right. So I can't force you to buy something. Then the government come in and say, look, that's not appropriate, right? But free trade, right? So freedom to have and raise their children. To raise them how we want to, as long as we're not infringing upon somebody else's right. Freedom to choose where we want to live. Has that always been a freedom of people? No, it hasn't been, right? Freedom to speak out. What do we call this now? Freedom of speech, right? To say whatever we want to say as long as we're not infringing upon our neighbor's right. So I do want to convince you, I don't think it's hard, but that this is, I think, an appropriate definition of freedom. Certainly might not be the only definition of freedom or exclusive, but I believe that this is an appropriate definition of freedom. To be able to do whatever you want to do as long as you are not infringing upon another person's rights. Now, a little bit about myself. Thank you, Wendy. We'll kind of get through this, but I do think this is important. I just want you to know where my roots come from. I grew up on a ranch in southern Nevada. Bundy Ranch. It's way, way, way south in the Mojave Desert in Nevada, just north of the Grand Canyon, about 80 miles east of Las Vegas. The very arid, dry place. Here's my parents, Cliven and Carol Bundy. I'm very grateful for the blessing to be able to be raised by good parents who loved me and taught me and cared for myself and my brothers and sisters enough to teach us and correct us. And I'm very grateful for both of these wonderful people. This is a picture of the Bundy Ranch. You can see it's pretty arid. Not a lot of vegetation going on there. People wonder, how in the world do the cows live? Here's a little better picture of some vegetation, more on the foothills. Steer on the hill. But you can see around the brush there's grass. And they'll get fat on that grass. And they'll eat the shrub brush, and those trees there are Joshua trees. They'll get pears on them, and they'll eat the pears off of them. The greasewood right there, the chaparral, they don't like that much. They don't get much good out of that. But that's where I grew up. And it takes 100 acres to produce enough feed for one cow. So it takes a lot of land to cover. And people say, well, how do you operate? Well, it's much different than up here. It has to be. Those cattle very rarely leave the range. And when we gather the cattle or we harvest the calves, because it is a cow-calf operation, we do it by trapping them around the waters. We put a corral around the waters. We have trap corrals. Sometimes we'll put, good hay in there. But they have to come in to get water. And so they'll come in and we'll trap them, and then we harvest the calves. And that's how we do it. And it's constantly. We have traps all over. We'll do an area for 3 or 4 months, or a couple areas for 3 or 4 months. Then we'll move to another. So it's all year round. It's not a harvest all at once, which is sometimes good and sometimes bad. But the challenge has always been to be able to harvest and work the cattle and give them what they need. But my family went into this area in 1877. They weren't the first to go into that area, actually. There was a group that went in before us, or people, they were sent down from Brigham Young, from Salt Lake. They went down there, and they were down there for less than a year, and they went back and reported to Brigham Young that the place was uninhabitable, that it was too hot, too arid, and no one was going to be able to live there. And so we always tease that my family, or Brigham Young said, well, let's find the most stubborn, obstinate, hard-headed people we can find. We'll send them down there and see how they do it. So he finds my family. He sends us down there, and we've been down there ever since. And they diverted the waters out of the Virgin River, began to level the grounds and build farms, and they began immediately to run their cattle and horses and oxen up on the foothills. And there's springs all over. Well, quite a few springs even that are there, and they're artesian springs. Some of them just have a wet spot on the ground, but they would dig down and they get that water, and they would capture it and bring it up. And there's one that's called Rabbit. I don't have a picture of it. I'd love to show you, but I'm 46 years old, and I've never seen it run more or less. It's always run about the size of a pencil. And it'll fill up. We have a large tank. It's about a 12 by 12, probably 6-7 foot high concrete tank. And then we go from there, and it fills up many water troughs for probably close to 12, 13 miles. And that's just one spring. And I asked my dad, he's 75, have you ever seen that run more or less? And he says, no, I've never seen it in my lifetime run more or less. So the consistency is there for us to make a living and to provide water for our cattle. My dad, this is him on a horse. You can see the bull, it's got some hair on its horn, probably just got done hooking the horse. They're kind of rank. But my dad says that he is a producer for the American people. And what does he produce? He produces a commodity that he calls red meat. And that's his contribution. That's what he does, and he's done that his entire life. That's what he loves to do. He wants to produce, and he is a producer. And he does it in a place where most people can't do it, and no one wants to really. And so that's my dad. This is my little brother. This is a scene that I was very familiar with growing up, branding and working the calves. You can see that old stockade corral behind it, right? Just cedar posts, you dig big hole, and then you have a cable wrapped around, and it makes the best corral. That'll last. Some of these corrals are over 100 years old. This is a scene that's not too unfamiliar. My little sister getting off the bus, she's met with 4 dogs and a calf. That baby calf was actually taken out of his mother through a C-section. My dad took him out because his mother got hit on the road. And she died, and my dad saved the calf, and we bottle fed it since the day it was born. Back up here a little bit. So when I was about 15 years old, my dad came to me and said, the ranch isn't big enough for the both of us. And he wasn't necessarily being mean. He was saying it out of love, because we butted heads, but that wasn't why he said I had to, leave the ranch at some point. He was warning me that the ranch just didn't make enough living for more than a couple families. And he has a whole bunch of kids, I'm in the middle, and I'm most likely going to have to go and make a living for myself. And he was telling me that. He was getting my mind wrapped around the thought of having to leave the ranch and maybe figuring out a different way to make a living. And that's ultimately what I ended up having to do, even though I love the ranch. My children just love to go to the ranch, and the freedom that we experienced there was tremendous. And I think it's one of the reasons why my family, my brothers, my dad, my sisters and so forth, were not willing to yield to something that was completely different than freedom, because of the ranch and the freedom that we were able to live with. So he tells me that I've got to, probably someday that I'm going to have to leave the ranch, and ultimately I did. But first I went and served a mission in Minnesota for the Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints. I served a 2-year mission there and did my best to teach as many people as I could about the gospel of Jesus Christ. And those years are sacred to me. There was both a spiritual and other type of refinement that I experienced there that I never could have experienced in any other way. And I'm grateful for that time, and believe that it set me on a path that was different. It was a path that wasn't necessarily for myself. It was a path that was more for the Lord, and a desire to serve the Lord, and a desire to ultimately do what He wanted me to do. Then I went to Southern Utah University in Cedar City, Utah, and started school, started a little business, but ultimately wondered why I was there. I was there for like 6 years. Wasn't really great for business being there. It was just kind of too small of town for what I was doing. I was starting in the fleet maintenance business, but I knew I was supposed to be there for some reason, and I ultimately finally found out why. That was because my sweet wife, I was waiting for her. I was waiting for her to come along, and she finally did. And the first week she was there, I scooped her up. It's like, finally I found you, and I had to convince her. Well, she says that she had to convince me, and I say that I had to convince her. So it was a good mutual relationship, right? Shortly after, we were engaged, and then we got married, and then 4 months later we left Cedar City. And we went to Arizona, and we started building our life there. Picture of us in 2007. And I built up that same business, moved it down there, and it was again a fleet maintenance business where we managed and maintained commercial trucks, like your big delivery trucks. And ultimately built one of the largest private fleet maintenance companies in Arizona. I have hired hundreds of people, dealt with millions of dollars of budgets. We built procedures and processes that actually still today lead the industry in how we do those things. And in fact, the way that we did that was when I was in business for about 17 years, began to see that the industry was missing some pieces that the people like me, business owners and in the maintenance industry, really needed some tools. I was using like 4 or 5 different softwares at the same time. Plus, I was still doing my work orders on paper. And so I looked and hunted and tried to find a software that would do all of it, and it just wasn't out there. Well, I was taught by my father, and always thought that because of that if you can't get a job in the United States of America, you make your job, right? And I thought, well, if I can't get the software and the tools I need, then I'm going to make them. And so I began to put a team together, and it took us almost 4 years, and we developed a software that did some amazing things. We used our employees, and we used our customers and our vendors and all the office staff as guinea pigs. And it was kind of a concerted effort that we all worked together, even though we weren't all part of my company. We all worked together, and we built a software that ended up being a pretty amazing software. Went the wrong direction here. And ultimately, I built it. We used it in our shop. It became one of the such a huge impact in our shop, and we liked it so much we began to sell it to other shops. And now it's one of the leading fleet maintenance shop management softwares in North America. And so you probably didn't know that I had a tech background, right? That I actually have built software, and since then I built 2 more softwares that I've used for several things. One is, you might be familiar with, is the People's Rights, which is a system that has a network of people, about 65,000 people in it now. And then I built one other software beside that. So I got a little tech background. Probably didn't know that. About that time was when all this was happening, I felt life was pretty good. It was the first time in my life that I had both time and money. Usually you have time, but you don't have money, right? Or it's the other way, you have money, but you don't have any time. And so I began to, look and ask the Lord what I should do with my time and resources. And what happened after that was, well, sometimes you pray for things and you get them, and then you wonder, why in the world did I pray for that? Because then what happened in 2014, the federal government came down upon my family, surrounded our family home, and threatened while they were destroying our ranch, saying that it wasn't ours. We'd been there since 1877, 5 generations, about 140 years at that time. Began basically saying that it wasn't ours, and they began to destroy that ranch, and said if we resisted in any way, that there would be another Waco or Ruby Ridge. And of course, I'm in Arizona, watching this from a distance, and being very, very, very concerned for my family. And ultimately, my dad called us together, and I was more than willing to come up. And what I saw, I could not believe, because I really could not wrap my mind around it. Because it was, I saw helicopters and MRAMs and troops and military-type convoys. I saw them patrolling any entrance out to the ranch. And then they began killing cattle. They killed about 60 head, shooting them from helicopters, driving them so hard they were killing the cattle, leaving the baby calves out in the desert. They were burying them in mass graves with dump trucks or backhoes and dump trucks. And then they were destroying the water infrastructure. Some of those water infrastructure have been in there over 100 years, as I talked about. They're just tearing them out. Some of the handprints on the concrete are over 100 years old, of my family and other ranchers that developed those areas. And it was just something that I couldn't quite even understand. I'll show you. I know it's kind of hard to believe, right? It really is. And I don't blame anybody for having a hard time believing, but I want to show you. I'm going to fast forward this if I can. So this is kind of the scene that you would see, and you watch, this is just one part, you watch this federal agent. This is after we kind of got enough people there, we kind of started protesting back. And you can see he walks up and just body slams this 56-year-old. You better get
because there's a claim right now.
We're not killing cattle.
That's
we're not killing cattle.
We don't know that. That was the whole reason why.
I will tell you right now, we're not killing cattle. as well.
Okay. And that's you saying that?
No, and again, I'm the guy in charge.
Okay.
I do not lie. On behalf of the United States government, I do not lie.
There are no baby cattle
None.
left out there after you guys have been none?
Not killing. They're doing every effort that if they separate a calf, they identify it.
What if I have proof to
rope
the
it, bring it
contrary?
in. Well, again, to get every single baby calf that's dead,
Oh my goodness.
is that what you're saying?
You guys are leaving them out there.
No, they're roping. If we gather in an area, the specific area we gather in, anyone that is separated is identified, and they go back and they collect it. Now, if there are baby calves in other areas, that very well could happen.
Well, that's what.
So, that's just a teeny little piece of what was happening. And ultimately what happened was because of, the wisdom mostly of my mother, she was like, film it. There were snipers on the hills. We took pictures, filmed it, we sent it out. We said, this is what's happening to us right now. There is literally snipers, federal snipers on the hills around our home right now. A lot of this stuff was exposed later, but we began to send that information out with evidence. And the American people saw it and were not okay with what was happening. And ultimately, after a buildup of 7 days of pretty, just destruction and mayhem, really, the American people came ultimately in thousands and gave the federal agents an ultimatum to leave. That was it. You leave. And they decided to leave. This is a picture of kind of where it was a little bit of a standoff. I could give you a video of that, but I think we need the time to talk about Idaho. But ultimately, here's a picture of one of the federal agents, and he's about 3/4 away through the line, so he's only showing about a third of the federal vehicles that left that day because the American people said no. You see that line? And it's, like I said, it's another probably 2/3 all the way up to the freeway. And this is how they staged themselves when they left. But the important thing is that they left. And why did they leave? Because the American people told them to leave. Yes, there was a sheriff deputy that finally did his job, yes, and that's an important part. But ultimately, the American people come together and said, look, this is not okay that our government is acting this way. And they ultimately left. Now, that changed me. It changed me. It made me a better person in some ways, and maybe not, and maybe a little more of a skeptical person in another. And I moved shortly after that from Arizona. This is the picture we just took last year, but I moved from Arizona all the way up to Emmett, Idaho. And I moved to Emmett, so it's 7 years ago now that we moved. I moved there because I and my wife and I needed to feel like our family was among people who would stand and who would, defend liberty and who we could feel secure around. And we felt that Idaho was the place that the Lord was guiding us. So we came here. And I thought that Idaho was this really conservative place that would stand for liberty against anything that was coming our way. And many of you know, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, that just about 2.5 hours away from where I moved, there was another ranching family that the same thing was happening to them, the Ammon family. And I ultimately went to their defense. By this time, we could reach millions of people. We were thrown into the limelight. And so I did that and stood for them. And the federal government could not allow what happened at the Bundy Ranch to happen there. And they arrested myself and several others. They went around and arrested my entire family and friends for protesting at the Bundy Ranch, if you will. And then they threw us in prison. And we were there for 2 years. Never convicted of a crime. Ultimately, we beat them in 2 federal trials. The first one was with the Portland jury. That's a miracle, amazing, right? The federal government spent $100 million trying to prosecute my family. And about half that time I spent in solitary confinement in a 7x10 box. Never once was able to have any contact with my wife or children the entire 2 years. Any physical contact. I was never able to touch them, hold them, express my love to them, and it was a very, very difficult time. However, through the literal miracle that the Lord gave us, we walked out of those federal prisons without even a misdemeanor, and we did not compromise or yield. And it showed me at that time, one, is how rights are maintained and how important it is that the people stand up. But also, how when the Lord gives you the advantages, even in a terrible, difficult situation, how you can prevail. Because a simple little ranching family with very little resources beat the most powerful government, the most powerful legal team, with the largest resources ever known in the history of man. And we did it not only once, but we did it twice. And so I went home to my family, and I didn't want anything to do with government at all. All I wanted to do, I even refused to vote. All I wanted to do was take care of my little family and for everybody to leave me alone. That's how I felt. And then 2020 rolled around. And I knew, and I had to admit and realize, well, I realized, but I was kind of denying it, that they were never going to leave us alone. And that the very same thing that they had done to my family and were doing to so many others, they're now doing and trying to do to everybody in the United States. And what is that? The taking of rights. My family had clear deed to the grazing rights in that area, established with the state of Nevada. We had been there for 140 years, since 1877, 5 generations. And then the federal government comes along and says, these aren't your rights, they're actually privileges, and we're saying they're our rights, and therefore you can't be there anymore. Well, is that not what happened to us? Is what is happening to us? What about our right to our bodies? I mean, who gets to decide what they put in our bodies, what we put on? Is it us or them? They're saying that it's not a right, that it's a privilege, and that they get to decide. The very same thing that my family was fighting, and I realized this, and realized that it was my duty to do all I could to combat it and to try to preserve liberty. So, now let's talk about, so is there any questions that you might have about what happened at, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time there because we really need to focus on Idaho, okay? But I do want to get anything out of the way that you might have concerns about the ranch or the refuge or myself, because every time I Google my name, I just hate myself. I can't stand it. Actually, I don't, but if I believed it, I would. Man, who's this guy? And I'd look in the mirror and I go, man, you're really terrible. Go ahead.
I have a question. Why do you feel that your family was targeted? Did they want the ranch for some
Harry Reid
purpose?
kid that wanted your ranch?
That's a good question. I'll try to be really fast, okay? Harry Reid and his buddies had decided that they were going to lease a huge area about 70 miles from the Bundy Ranch to a Chinese corporation to build the largest solar plant in the world. And it was already signed and done. It was done. However, then the environmentalists, because you got to make sure that the extreme environmentalists are happy. Well, they said, well, we want a mitigation area for the desert tortoise and all the wildlife that's going to be in this area. And so they said, well, we really hate the Bundy family. Let's make the Bundy Ranch the mitigation area. And they came and said, you can no longer ranch there. And my dad said, no, this is mine. And they said, well, we're gonna take it. And my dad said, no, you're not. And they said, well, we're gonna take it anyway. And my dad said, hell no. And that's what started it.
Question, did you have a perpetual grazing right, or was it one that was re-upped or, reenacted, periodically?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, I don't want to go into it too much, but I don't know how I can answer this without. So ultimately, my family was there in 1877. Bureau of Land Management wasn't even around until 70 years later. And Nevada was a state 13 years prior, 11 or 13 years prior. They became a state in 1864. It wasn't until 1890 that the state allowed the people to deed their livestock watering and grazing rights. And my family did that. We owned 11 of them. And we've owned them since they first moved in, but we were able to actually document it and claim it in the state since 1890. We still got them. You can go to the Nevada Department of Water Resources, because that's how they recorded them, registered them. Type in Ammon Bundy, and you'll see they're there. And the title is livestock grazing, livestock watering, and then the grazing shows you how many cattle are grazing in and around that area. And they had to keep proving up on it. Well, ultimately, what happened through a whole series of things was the Taylor Grazing Act. Then they defined the ranches, which wasn't their responsibility. It should have been the state. And then they created these allotments. And then they created what they called an improvement fee. And it was all the ranchers that said, we'll put into that so they could build the fences. And there was 12% was supposed to go to the administration for the board of the ranchers, a ranching board, to determine where the other funds would go to as far as fencing, because they wanted to build fences so that the ranchers wouldn't fight of whose boundaries was what, right? Well, that, through a long series of, changing and, doing what the government does, ultimately ended up into what we call a grazing fee, or grazing permit now. And when they came and said, well, we're going to stop your allotment, and there was a lot of trouble before, because, anyway, I guess I just have to explain it. I won't take too much long, but on that, I just talked to you about how we gather our cattle, right? And how we have to work our cattle. Well, one of the things that they would come down and say, well, you have to take all your cattle off at a certain period of time. Well, you can't do that in that country. You can't do that. And so this was going on. There was these back and forths going on. And this was generational from my grandfather to my dad. And there was this constant battle. And then one day my dad goes down to the Southern Nevada district office for the Bureau of Land Management. And on the wall it had a logo or a quote on there. And it said, no moo by 92, cattle free by 93. And he understood, and even prior to that, for a decade or so, that the policies were just to put them out of business. That's what they were. And when he saw that, he knew. He knew. And so they went on a search, legal search, hired attorneys, went deep into the Constitution. And they realized that the federal government, after statehood, doesn't have jurisdiction over the land and the resources. Right. And that all the opinions of our founders and everything was just opposite of what was happening. And so then when they come to him and say, we're going to close your allotment, he's like, it's my private property. I have deeds. I could sell them, the deeds. I could borrow money on them. I could transfer them, trade them. I could give them as a inheritance. They're real property. They're deeds. And I'm not going to let you take them. And that was the stand he took. And it went through a whole series of back and forth and battles. And ultimately, they decided that they were going to send a 213 Army, Federal Army, down upon my family and force it out of my family's hands. So that's basically the kind of the quick legal side of it. And now it's been challenged in multiple courts, and every time we've challenged it in front of a jury, we've won.
So that ranch survives today, one question, and two, I imagine a lot of people in this area even supported Brad Little because he was a rancher and believed that his ideology would be similar to theirs, and therefore he wouldn't turn his back on us. And nearly every politician in the history of mankind, at one point or another, has moved away from the people and gone into his own self-interest mode. Unexplainable to me, I can't understand it. I'm wondering if you have an explanation.
I do. I'm going to say the second part after I present a few things. First part is yes. The ranch has been there since 1877. Was the first cattle that we put out on the range, and they did kill about 60 head, but the Bundy cattle never left the range. They remained on there, and they are still today. And we repaired all the damage that they caused. We were able to, eventually replace the cattle. And my dad still ranches today and works that ranch. And
Did they ever pay any damages?
Oh no. That's a whole nother story. Okay, let's change focus. So, because I need to get into what's happening in Idaho. Just wanted you to understand me a little better. But let's talk about Idaho. Because Idaho is in a battle for its conservative soul. And a good part of the reason why is because of this man right here. And some of you may even like him. A lot of you probably voted for him. Probably almost everybody did. Which we didn't know. I mean, he wasn't really tested. 2020 tested everything. Right? And now it's a lot more clear of who people are. It's just what happened. Including this man. Because Idaho was the first in a lot of things. And some of the first that Idaho was in we should be very proud of. Because Idaho was the first state to arrest people for attending church. Yeah. First state in the United States, at least since the Civil War, to have someone arrested for going to church.
Always trust in chariots and others trust in horses.
This is the pastor. Look at the terrible criminal activity that they're participating in. They're singing hymns outside without masks. These officers somehow are justifying themselves in arresting the pastor. Now, Idaho was also the first state to arrest a mother for going to the park. Idaho was one of the first states to raid a business for not shutting down during the COVID lockdown. Now, why are officers acting this way? Why are police in Idaho acting this way? Because, well, actually, I'm going to have you listen to something. This is an Idaho State Police officer. He's undercover, and he's serving this business, the business owners, a citation because they didn't close down. And listen to what he says. He tells us why he's doing it.
Real quick, this is from the state.
Would you say that again, sir? Hand him that letter back.
Now,
I would like to hear him identify himself again.
I'm Jake Schweiken with the Idaho State Police. I'm just delivering this letter in response to you guys opening it, in contrast to the stay-at-home order.
Says I'm issuing this letter for you in contrast to staying open during the lockdown or whatever it says, stay-at-home order. And a couple days after that, ISP raided this business and began prosecuting the owners. And why? Why did they do that? Well, because of the orders of this man, Brad Little. Why did they have someone arrested for going to church? Multiple people, actually, 3 people, because of the orders of this man. Why did they arrest a woman for taking her children to the park in the United States of America, in Idaho? Because of the orders of this man. And we need to be aware of it. I'm going to go through some of the things. I'm going to show you some things that hopefully will wake you up, or maybe make you more awake. Maybe you're already awoken. Because maybe Governor Brad Little, maybe he did it because he wanted to protect the health of Idahoans. Maybe. So open your minds. He just might have done that, right? You guys are being a little judgmental here. He might have really good reason, right? So let's find out. Let's see. So who remembers the first day of the first emergency order? Right here.
I was up in Moscow. I was going to school up there.
Oh, man.
School was shut down, and we were told that if we left our little cinder block rooms without just straight going home, we would be in trouble, possibly expelled.
Expelled, yeah. So Moscow is where they arrested those people. You know that. Do you remember what day that was?
I don't remember the exact day. I just remember we were sitting in class, and we got a message over some intercom like, hey, something just happened. I don't know if this is a big deal, but you might wanna do something after class. Just send the students home.
Okay, so it was middle of March. It was March 13th. March 13th. Now something interesting happened. Remember, we're going to test, or we're asking the question if Brad Little did it for the health and safety of the people of Idaho. Something happened on March 13th, the very same day that he issued an emergency order. And that is, President Trump announced that he was releasing $50 billion of federal funds to states in emergency status. Okay? So if you're in emergency status, you could get part of this $50 billion. Now, hang on, it could have been just devastation going on in Idaho, right? Just could have been, terrible pandemic. But on the governor's own website, he says that on March 13th, the first confirmed COVID case. So there was one COVID case on March 13th. And he put the state of Idaho in emergency status. The same day that President Trump announced that if the state was in emergency status, they could get part of these $50 billion. Okay? Now, who remembers when he put the state of Idaho in extreme emergency status? Anybody? It was not quite 2 weeks later, on March 25th. You remember when it was emergency and then extreme state of emergency? And interesting enough, on that day, March 25th, was the same day that President Trump and Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced a $2 trillion federal stimulus deal for states that were in extreme emergency status. And we had 136 unconfirmed cases. We're a state of 1.8 million people. So it's hard for me to believe. Well, anyway, let's go on, because he pretty much explains himself. For example, this is one of his orders, and it says here, and securing millions of dollars in funds, and it goes on, talks about this. He says, basically that President Trump announced this, and then he says that basically I'm making a proclamation, and then I want to point you to this section 46601. Remember that. 46601. That's what he's saying. I have authority to do this because of statute 46601, Idaho statute 46601. In this letter, he thanks President Trump for $1.25 billion, and he basically says that we're looking for more. More is coming. And then this is a really important executive order. 2020-07. So this is the 7th order in year of 2020. And he says, whereas I issued a proclamation on March 13th, whereas I issued a proclamation on March 25th declaring a state of extreme emergency. And then he says, whereas Congress has passed and President Trump has signed 3 legislative packages and that provide state funding in response of COVID-19. So he's telling us what he's doing here. Whereas I anticipate additional congressional actions on federal relief packages to states regarding COVID-19. So he's like, there's a lot more coming. Then he says, now therefore, I, Brad Little, Governor of the state of Idaho, do hereby order the creation of a COVID-19 financial advisory committee comprising of members appointed by and serving at the pleasure of the governor. So he's putting together a committee with of his buddies, his friends, that serve at his pleasure. And then they're going to take all this money, and as you see in the end of the order, it says, for the coronavirus relief funds and other funds to be administered by the office of the governor. So there, the governor and his buddies that he chooses and that serve at his pleasure, they themselves get to decide where all this money is spent. They're going to get it from the federal government, billions of dollars. They're anticipating a whole bunch more money, and he's got this little buddy system of his that serve at his pleasure, and they decide how they're going to spend the money. And they spend it out of the office of the governor. Now, how are the expenditures and the funds of Idaho's, who's supposed to determine how they're spent? Yeah. They're our representatives, right? We elect them, they go up there, they represent us. They're supposed together to decide as a body where the funds go. That's supposed to keep it from a small group of people or one person just, being corrupt with it, building their own power with it, padding their buddies' pockets. It's supposed to be out in the open where everybody can see it, and it's all debated, and they decide as a body how the money in Idaho is spent, right? And it's the legislature that does that. Not the office of the governor? Not a few buddies of Brad Little that serve at his pleasure? Who knows how much money so far Brad Little's received from the federal government for COVID relief? Too much is the right answer, yeah. $18 billion. Billion with a B.
Was there an audit?
Yeah, him and his buddies did it. That served at his pleasure.
We should all be.
They audited each other.
We should be $10,000 richer, each one of us, right?
Yeah. So $18 billion, almost 3 times the annual state budget, and a very handful of people that Brad Little selected and that serve him at his pleasure get to decide how that money's spent. And they've usurped. They've usurped.
There's a surplus right now, and he's deciding he better dish out that surplus?
No, that's not. But I mean, it's a little bit, because there's so much money that he can make it look like there's a surplus and buy your vote. Okay? So this is what's happening right now. Almost 3 times the annual state budget, $18 billion Governor Little has received, and he himself and his buddies get to decide where it's at. And they've completely bypassed a republic form of government, our legislatures, and are spending that money on their own by themselves. Okay, I wish that was all of it, right? If we could probably deal with it and try to straighten it out if that was all of it. But you remember when I said, remember that statute, the authority that he said, 46601? Well, 46601, look at the title. 46, Military and Military Affairs, Chapter 6, Martial Law and Active Duty. 46601, Authority of the Governor. So did he put us in martial law?
No.
We were in it before.
Did he put us in martial law?
Essentially, yes.
Did Governor Little use martial law authorities and put us in martial law?
Yes, essentially that's what he did.
Okay, he did. Now, let's read down here, because he kept quoting that authority, right? He kept saying, this is my authority, I'm doing this with my authority. Well, let's read a little bit about this. So let's go to 2. During a period of the state of extreme emergency, that's what he put us in, the governor shall have complete authority over all agencies of the state government, including all separate boards and commissions, and the right to exercise within the area all policing power vested in the state.
Dictator.
So, I mean, am I reading that right? Governor Little took all the authorities over all agencies of the state government, including separate boards and commissions, and including all policing power vested in the state. And then he redirected the funds, or took funds from the federal government just to him and his buddies. So now he has all the authority, he controls all the authority, and he has all this money, right? And and he gets to decide how all the agencies are run, all the money is spent, and what do we call that? There's tyranny, dictator, a monarch, right? And in fact, Thomas Jefferson, no, it was Madison actually, said that the definition of tyranny is when all powers of government are put in one body. That's the very definition of tyranny. But, and this, this isn't like a hyperbole. I'm not exaggerating. I'm just showing you what he did. I'm showing you his own documents, his own words, the law, what happened. I'm not trying to excite you to get you to not vote for him without showing you the facts of what he did. This is what he did to Idaho. Now, interesting enough, well, let's look at this real quick, because this is his stay-at-home order to self-isolate. This is what Governor Little thinks of you. He says, this order directs all individuals living in the state of Idaho to self-isolate at their place of residence. So he says, I took all of the powers of government, and then I issue this order. And I order you, all of us who live in Idaho, to stay in your houses. And don't come out until I tell you to. And he does say that. Except that, right? Except that I give you permission to come out. And down here in 3, it says, directing all businesses and government agencies to cease non-essential operations at physical locations in the state of Idaho. So, you got to close down your business unless we declare that you're essential. Well, I don't know about you, but paying my bills, feeding my family is pretty essential to me. I don't know how he decides what is essential and what isn't essential.
He's got all the money.
Well, he's got a lot. Down here, prohibiting all non-essential gatherings of any number of individuals. Well, does that include church? I thought worship was protected. In fact, the United States Constitution, the very first sentence of the very first amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
That's right.
And the Idaho State Constitution is even more clear on this matter. It says that no individual shall be prohibited from exercising their religious, worships and so forth. Very, very clear. Yet, we have an order here from Governor Little saying that we can't gather. We can't go to church. And he's sending officers around to arrest people for going to church, for going to the park, for not obeying his order. Putting the people of Idaho in a precarious situation. right? Yeah, and the police in a precarious situation, yeah. I do have to say, because I have a love-hate relationship with them. I do. I have a love-hate relationship. I love them and honor them when they protect my rights.
Exactly.
I do, and I want to honor them. But when they infringe upon my rights, and even, I think, almost as equally important, when they violate their oath of office. Because each one of them, each one of these officers here, they took an oath. What did they take an oath to? What Constitution? State and federal and U.S. Constitution, right? And both of them say the religion is protected off, and so is assembly. You can't arrest people for worshiping. You can't arrest people for assembling like this. It's off limits. Now, I want to ask you if Governor Little's lifted his order, if it's all over. No. Did you know that right now, according to where we're set in the law, ISP, the governor can send and arrest us right now? It's not right. Yeah, good. Who said good luck? Good job. Who said it? Cover my mic. Who said that? Agent Carlos, that was not anybody I knew. But that's the reality. That's where we find ourselves still. And in fact, January 7th, 2022, I need to get it so I can show it to you. I haven't got it uploaded yet. Governor Little issued another proclamation. So just a few days ago. And you know what he said? He said that the emergency order is still in place in Idaho. He wanted to make sure at the beginning of the year that everybody understood that Governor Little was still in charge. So therefore he could still have his little buddy team and still take billions of more dollars from the federal government. He can still control the agencies of the state government. He can still stay in that power that he wants to stay in. Yeah.
And that 46601, first of all, I don't understand why it's in the Idaho Constitution to begin with. It should be concluded out.
So it's not in the Constitution, it's in the statute.
It should be done away with. Let's put it that way. But
Not abused.
For me reading through that, I believe it said that those emergency powers were only supposed to last for 30 days unless they felt like it needed to be extended.
For another 30 days.
Exactly. So he's got this endless extension.
Well, no, that's not the way it reads. You're almost right. It says, and again, if I had the internet, I could bring it up. But it says that he has he can put the state in extreme state of emergency for 30 days. Well, emergency for 30 days. If it's extreme, then he could put it in for another 30 days. But that's it. That's it. And then there's the statutes, or statutes say it's not in the same one, but it's in another one. It says that if the governor does not restore the powers back to the legislature after 60 days, it says that the legislature shall convene on the 90th day, and that they can pass a joint resolution in the House and the Senate and end the emergency order. So, well, what happened was we called them, we sent certified letters, we informed them, we said, look, the 90th day is June 23rd. And we've got about 17 of them to show up. It wasn't enough to make a quorum. So then, they did do a proclamation, but it had no legal authority. And so then we began to put a lot of pressure on all the legislatures to, what are you going to do? You're going to just leave us in this emergency status for months and months and months? And they said, well, we'll take care of it in the 2021 legislative session. That's what they said. So then the 2021 legislative session comes around, and the House starts a resolution to end the emergency order. And it starts to get some momentum, and then all of a sudden, Governor Little says, I want an emergency meeting. And he gets all the representatives in the room, and he says, look, if you end the order, then Idaho won't receive any more federal funding. And we'll be, he uses whatever terminology to convince them and says, and we'll be at a disadvantage from the other states and all this other garbage.
Same old garbage.
And so the legislatures stopped pursuing the joint resolution to end the emergency orders. Yeah. Not only that, in between that time, in August, the end of August, Governor Little called for an emergency legislative session. Do you remember that? August 25th, 2020. And what Governor Little was trying to do, and all his buddies, they were trying to pass a law that would make it so that they were immune to any of their COVID decisions. Legally immune. So people couldn't sue them. Or they couldn't sue the hospitals if they injected them with something and someone died or had a really bad reaction to it. So they were protecting everybody who was involved in that. That's what they were trying to do in August of 2020. And so I'm just giving you a little drop in the bucket of what's been going on and where in Idaho we're still at. There are many other things, like he suspended parental rights for when the state takes children into custody, and he did it under these emergency orders. He suspended the housing rules of when the state houses children in their custody, where they don't have to have so many staff per child, so many bathrooms, not even beds or bedrooms. He suspended all those. You can ask why, and I answered that in actually my virtual town hall that I did the beginning of this week. You have to go to my website and go to events and go to virtual town hall and click on the January, 11th. January 11th, and I show you all the documents of what they were doing and why I believe they were doing it. I think it's pretty straightforward and pretty terrible why. There's many other things. And ultimately, what it boils down to is we have a good old boys club in Idaho that have had power for way too long. Unchecked power. Because Idaho isn't a two-party system. I would like to see Idaho a 10-party system. But Idaho is not even a two-party system. Idaho is a one-party system. And there is no checks and balances really on these people. And so we, the people of Idaho, have to become aware and become that check and balance. Because they've had it their way for so long that they don't even think that, they think they can do whatever they want. And it's become very detrimental to the liberties of Idahoans and very precarious. Now, I want to take the rest of the time and answer your questions, have a conversation, and let's just talk here about your thoughts. You can ask me whatever question you want.
Well, that point you just ended on there, how about zero parties?
Yeah, that's a little better.
I mean, don't you agree that we should get rid of political parties when it comes to elections or serving in office?
I agree. I mean, there's always going to be people that are going to unite and be like a party, but this party system that we have is just terrible.
But not
terrible.
when it comes to elected office, is my point. They can be Republicans often.
You know the Republican Party says, when they want to say, they say that we're a private party.
I know.
Therefore we can do what we want, but then they want to act like they're part of, the democratic process of electing governors and so forth. And, I'm running as a Democrat. Hey, did you get that? Let me rephrase that. I'm running as a Republican and against the Democrats, but I don't necessarily, well, I don't in any way agree with the way that they've run the party. We have a party platform that is a really good party platform. It's a righteous platform. Discusses the need to lower taxes, the need to protect and defend our unborn children, the need to minimize the size of government. And it's just opposite from the Democratic Party, pretty much. And so I believe that is a righteous platform. But that's not what they have been doing. It's almost just opposite of what they've been doing. They've been, increasing the size of the government, increasing the amount of taxes. They have done almost nothing. Well, they have done nothing to protect our unborn children. And the list goes on and on and on. And so I always ask the question, well, who's more Republican? Who is more Republican? Is it those that are controlling the Republican Party? Or someone like you and I? Because there is a huge problem. Okay, what other questions we have? Right.
So, when there's turnover in politics, not everybody gets turned over at the same time. So how would you see yourself working against this good old boy network? I mean, you would just get lost in it. Like Brad Little, you become one of them because you can't fight him anymore.
Well, that is the reason why I'm running for governor. Because people have said, well, why don't you start as a senator or House of Representative or something like that? Why don't you start there and, work your way up and, like Brad Little, after 137 years, you finally become governor, right? And, I have really no desire to be a politician.
That's what we want.
I have no desire to be a politician. And where most of the usurpations and abuses of the people's rights are happening in the executive branch of government. That's where most of them that are happening. Well, as governor, I would be the head of the executive branch of government of Idaho. And I could take 4 to 8 years, and all I did was strip the powers of the executive branch of government, minimize the size, put checks and balances on the abuses and where the problems are, and push the responsibilities and restore the authority back to the legislature and back to the people. I could do that for 4 to 8 years and never ever legislate one thing, and do the people of Idaho a tremendous amount of good. But it is the governor that has to do that. It is the governor that has authority to do that. So I have no desire to go into the House of Representatives or to the Senate and get sucked up into all the corruption and the the back padding and the back room deals and all that. I have no desire to do that. I intend on going into the office of governor. I intend on finding out who the enemies of liberty are and who the friends of liberty are, where the waste is, where the abuse is. And through the proper use of my position, restoring the powers that belong to the legislature and the rights that belong back to the people of Idaho. That is what I plan on doing. And yeah, I have needs and things I want to get done to working with the legislature, for sure. And I believe the legislature, above all other things, needs leadership. They need a vision. They need direction, leadership. And I'm confident with a governor pushing for these things at the top, and then the people pushing the legislatures from the people up, if you will, that there can be a tremendous amount of good that'll come from that. And so I guess I just reiterate that I don't want to be a politician. And the office of the governor is the position that needs to be filled so that these usurpations found in the executive branch of government can be tore down, if you will. Yeah.
One more question. Any idea what Governor Little and Brandon talked about?
Well, we have some video of that. Sleepy Joe, he sure likes Governor Little.
Yeah.
He even said so when he went to California. Remember that? He's like, man, he's a great guy. He's doing a great job over there, right? So he's got his confidence. So I don't know what they talk about.
I don't think we have time for you to serve in any other capacity anyway. We need to nip this in the bud a whole lot sooner rather than later. And so, I could see where your position would be much more appreciated and effective, getting right to the top of things where you can have some pull. I understand why somebody might say work up through the ranks, but we don't have time for that.
Exactly. And I have no stomach for it. I really don't. I have no desire. I would love to go back, spend time with my family. I spend enough time with them. I'd love to go build another business. But I know sooner or later what's coming is there's no wealth that I can accumulate, no good that I can do that won't be interrupted.
Right.
And I agree with you. I don't think we have a lot of time. And I could actually prove that. I've got you right here and right here, but so statistically, if I had a little time I could show you, but I'll just explain it to you. Statistically, right now, if we continue on the path we're going, and if everything remains exactly the same, which it never does, it could accelerate or, other things can happen to make it a little slower. But right now, where we sit, if we continue the direction we're going, in 4.91 years, the Democrats will control the Idaho elections. And one of the reasons is because Democrats outvote the Republicans 3-1, meaning they go to the polls 3 times what the Republicans go to the polls.
And they steal too.
Well, they steal too. That's right. But so do rhinos. So do the Republicans. Right? So that is the reality. And also the policies that are being pushed right now in Idaho by Brad Little, Scott Bedke, these people in charge. They're the same type of policies that were pushed in Oregon 15 years ago. Washington, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico. All of these states were ultra-conservative states at one time. And what happens when you do the same thing as other people? What usually is the results? The same results, right? And so, not only in less than 5 years will the Democrats control the Idaho elections, but our own Republican leaders are driving us right in to an Oregon or a Washington right now. And I'll give you just one example so you don't think I'm just saying it to say it, right? Right? Well, let me show you. I won't give it to you. I'll show it to you. So, I'm just going to show you this. This is where the money comes from in Idaho. Well, here's the general fund. 43.2% comes in from the general fund, income taxes and other things. Here's the dedicated funds. That would be like, your fuel tax and so forth. It's the tax for dedicating your permits and licensing and so forth. 36% comes from the federal government. You don't think that comes with the strings attached, do you? Absolutely it does. So now, let's see how it's spent. Okay? Almost 40% of the state budget goes to welfare. Who do you think that attracts?
Yeah.
The best kinds of people.
The people we want as neighbors, right? So, and the policies, they're talking about increasing, housing from the state. Oh man, I wish I had these up where I could show you. Idaho has increased its food stamps more than any other state in the United States over the last 5 years. Okay?
Obama would be proud.
Obama, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we have what, Obamacare, we have Biden bucks, and now we have Brad bucks, right? So, you can see here. So, well, I don't know if it's intentional, it seems intentional, right? But we're increasing our welfare programs and attracting all these people coming in here who are going to vote against conservatives. And that's just one thing I can tell you. Well, what state has the largest food stamp program in the United States? Anybody know? No, it's Oregon. Oregon, right? And we, Idaho, over the last 5 years, have increased our food stamp programs more than any other state in the United States. So tell me how I'm wrong. We're doing the exact same things that Oregon, California, Washington, Nevada. I grew up in Nevada. If you would have told me when I was young that Nevada would be liberal in 2 decades, I would have said you're crazy. It was the most conservative, rugged individual type state that you would ever find. And
Who
now,
set that welfare policy in Idaho?
what's that?
Who set the welfare policy?
Brad Little.
He did.
Well, Brad Little and his buddies, I mean, he
Yeah.
signed it, and most of it's in the executive branch. Most of it's being pushed from the executive branch.
So you would have the authority to change it.
I would have the authority to change a lot of it, and I'd have a lot of influence to get the legislature to change the rest of it. Now imagine, this is a pretty big idea, but imagine that 39% right there. Imagine replacing it with that 36% right there and becoming independent from the federal government. Just imagine what could be done right here.
Quick question, I can't remember the percentage of federal lands that are supposedly, there's a huge percentage of all of our property in the state. What can a governor do to help liberate those federal lands into private ownership?
That's a great question. Something that I might know a little bit about. So some people grow up as multi-generational loggers, ranchers, and certainly we did as well. Some might be multi-generational attorneys, accountants. Well, I came from a multi-generational family fighting the federal government over federal use of federally controlled land. My family has studied this for generations. And it is time and absolutely necessary that we get our lands back in Idaho for the survival of Idaho. I'll give you an example. We have an affordable housing crisis going on right now. The reality of our children ever owning homes is something that statistically, mathematically, will never happen. If you look at the wages, the median income versus the cost of housing, they can't, unless something happens to them individually where they are higher than the median income of Idaho, they're never going to own a home. They can't afford a home. Unless they get some of that 39% of welfare, they're never going to own a home. Imagine that. Imagine the disparity that would bring. Think about your homes. Think about what it brings to you. The American dream was to come to the United States and own property. To be your own king of your own castle. And to be able to live free on it. That was the American dream. They've morphed it into coming and getting rich. That's not the American dream. With the rest of the world, you had to live under a serf or as a serf, under a lord or a king. But in America, the United States of America, or America even before, you could come and actually own your own land. Okay, so, go ahead.
With what you've been talking about, if you're ready to kind of switch gears, this is a good lead-in to how many people in here are aware that our property taxes shot through the roof? In 2022 is going to be whole different
Yep.
story. So if you could, and you could be like your plan that way with taxes, that would be, amazing.
Okay, I will. I wanna finish this, cause that's just one. I said that there's three, there's actually more than three. But there's three main reasons why we must get our lands back in Idaho. We must take that fight on. One is our affordable housing crisis. It's caused by a supply and demand. We're landlocked. Because this 61% of our land is controlled by the federal government. If you add military bases, it's 63. We want those military bases. They're constitutional. But the 61% is not. So what it's causing is we're landlocked. So if we go 37% of the land is either state or private. The rest of it is federally controlled. And 72% of our subsurface mineral rights. Now, because of supply and demand is an issue, because we're landlocked and so many people have moved here and so forth. Now, what are we building on? What are we building our homes on?
Prime farm ground.
That's right, prime farm ground, agricultural land. What's the #1 industry in Idaho?
Farming.
Yeah, farming, agriculture. And we should keep it that way. Puts us in a very strong position. But because we're landlocked, because people need homes, we're building on it. We're destroying our #1 industry in Idaho. Why? Because we can't build out. We have to build on our irrigated, prime farm ground. And anybody of you know that doesn't come easy. That farm ground does not come easy. And for generations, we've fought to build that farm ground and to irrigate that farm ground and to get it to where it'll actually grow a crop. And now we're digging it up and putting gravel and concrete in it so people can live in homes, which is very, very important. But yet, why are we building up on our hills where there's great land for development? Because bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. say we can't build on it. So, that's 2. Now 3 is this. Because we're getting more densely populated in our cities because we're landlocked. We're starting to build up. We're starting to see congestion. We're starting to see smog. We're starting to see pollution. We're starting to see homelessness. We're starting to see all of these things that happen in largely densely populated areas. Well, there's something else that comes along with that. Anybody want to guess?
Crime.
Well, crime is certainly one of them. Yeah, we're seeing crime. But they start to vote completely different. They lose their conservative values. They're not, for some reason, not connected to the earth. I mean, when you plant a seed and you grow it, you know there's a God. And then you depend on that to grow and actually create an increase. You pray to God. And even if it's just mowing your own grass, there's something about it that keeps us connected to God and keeps our values right. There's something about it. And when you build up in a densely populated city, rather than building out so everybody can have a little bit of land, you just created a situation where a small area, densely populated, politically controls the rest of the people. And that's what we're headed to. Why? All because of this. We have to get our lands back. We have to. Not only that, is the prosperity that is being held away from us because our lands and resources are being locked away. The cost of living because of that. I mean, I was up in Bonner's Ferry, 2 nights ago, and the guy was telling me about how he went down to the lumber store and bought a little piece of lumber and it cost him $40. The timber up there is amazing. And they have to go to the lumber store and buy $40 worth of lumber that came out of Canada. Why? Because the federal government's controlling our land and resources. Now, there was a couple people, but let me just wrap this up because it's not fair that a little family in the desert or any other family should have to fight the federal government over this. It's not fair. And it's not the way our founders designed it. How did our founders design it? That the state fight it. That when the federal government violates the Constitution, infringes upon the rights of the people, or tries to take their life, liberty, or pursuit of happiness or property away, that the state stands and takes those fights. But why is Brad Little never going to take that fight on? Money. I just showed you. Also, he's one of the largest landowners and benefited from this in Idaho. Because not only is he the largest landowner, but he also leases more land from the federal government than probably anybody in the state. He's not going to bite the hand that feeds him. And it's just this over and over again. Scott Bedke's the same way, exact same way. He's a rancher too. And he's the one next in line to take Governor Little's spot. They've got it all planned. It's never going to happen unless someone is willing to fight for it. And if the people are willing to support that person. Never going to happen. Now there's a question over here.
Yeah, a couple of them here. What you're saying, you want to take back the state of Idaho's land from the federal government. What's your plan for doing that? I've been reading through your information. There's no how are you going to approach that?
So,
and then number two, you're telling me that you're supporting the Constitution. You're going to bring us back to the Constitution. And then one of your last platform on this says that you are going to, your first item of business is going to be to implement executive order. There is no constitutional basis in the state of Idaho or the national constitution for executive order power for anybody.
Okay. Which one do you want me to answer first?
And that's what got us into this whole mess that we have with COVID, is this executive order crap that everybody thinks is constitutional and it's not.
So
We are under a monarchy by allowing our government to implement constitution or executive orders.
So, you want me to,
It's not constitutional.
okay, so let me answer
That's your first item of business.
So let me answer the first question, or the second question, since that's one. So, does the chief executive officer of Walmart have the authority to make an executive decision, an executive order?
For Walmart.
For Walmart, right? So his order doesn't go on to Target? No, so it stays with Walmart, right? Because that's his authority. Does the chief executive officer of Idaho have the authority to make an order for the executive branch?
No. Yes.
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do.
For the executive branch. So does that authority go and force the judicial branch to do anything?
No.
Does that force the legislative branch to do anything? No. Does it force the people to do anything?
No.
That's right. It is an order within the executive branch of the things that need to be done in the executive branch. So when I talk about executive orders, that's what I'm talking about. Okay?
So there's no way to enforce that in executive order. You just said that the people, it doesn't affect the people, it only affects the executive branch of the government, and it doesn't affect anybody else. In order to do that, you have to go through the legislative process.
Well, the legislature doesn't have authority over the people. They have authority to implement laws for the state.
The governor does not have the authority to pass laws.
Okay, so let's use your, because you're making a great point. So what about the funding that goes to the abortion clinics? Well, guess what? Through executive order, I can end that funding. Right? That goes a long, long way. What's that?
It's not constitutional.
What do you mean it's not constitutional?
Executive order is not constitutional.
It is? So how does I understand what you're saying, but how does the governor issue the direction to the executive branch of government? How does he do that?
Executive order.
He does it through executive order. So I understand your point.
Show me the wording.
Well, the governor has authority, right?
Show me the wording in the Constitution where it says.
The executive branch of the executive branch of government has to be run by the governor who is elected by the people. He has to have a mechanism in order, he has to have a mechanism in order to issue his issues. What's that?
It's not in there. Your
Well,
wording is not there. Executive order, you will not find it
Give me the, I actually normally carry an Idaho there's an entire section of the Idaho Constitution that covers executive powers. Right?
And show me executive order in there one time.
Well, you might, okay, what do you want me to call it? An executive, I can rename it if you want.
Order, and that's not in the Constitution.
I can rename it if it makes you feel better.
It's a memo.
Yeah, we can call it executive memo or executive decision, whatever you want that satisfies you,
All
right?
I'm saying is you want my vote and you're doing something that you're preaching against. You're preaching against.
I think I made it very clear.
Executive orders, and that's your first item of business.
So as governor, I just sat there and go, there's no other way to communicate because it's unconstitutional. So, yeah, yeah.
No, I'm not. I'm concerned with the power. And the
Okay.
federal government's doing the same thing, and that's what's got
So
us so messed to begin with.
So I have answered your question. You might not like it, but I've answered your question. I'm gonna move on. So,
You haven't showed me.
well, go to the Idaho government, go to the Idaho Constitution and go read the executive powers.
I've read it. It's
Okay,
not there.
there are executive powers.
That's the whole problem.
There are executive powers. Okay,
There are
so now,
executive powers. There's no executive.
so now, he asked another question, which I think is worth answering. What is the mechanism that we use to get these lands back into our hands? And it's actually quite simple. Because if you look at your county assessors, or I don't think it might be in the assessors, but recorders, right? You go online or you go down there, and it's broken up into parcels, right? Parcel numbers. You can see who the owner is, and if you look at some of this federally controlled land, then you will see that it might say BLM on it or Forest Service on it or something. Well, if you go down to the county recorder's office and you ask them to show you a title, what are they going to do? There's no title. They don't have a title. And that's because it's unappropriated land. It's never been appropriated. Now if it was titled to an individual at first and then federal government bought it or took it, then there would be a title. But most of this land is unappropriated. And the state and the counties have the power to do what? To appropriate land. Well within our power. And we will appropriate this land. And will it be a battle? You dang right there will be a battle. Will it be a legal battle? Yes. Will it be a constitutional battle that's probably never been seen before? Yeah. But it will be the state fighting that battle. And we will appropriate this land into the hands properly through some disposal mechanisms according to the authority that we have. All right? Okay.
Help you out a little bit. Go back to your Constitution of the United States. Specifically says in there that the federal government cannot own any land except for military installations and 5 square miles in a district of Columbia.
Okay. You go to Article 1817. 1817. And it says this, because you're really close, but it says, let's see, 1817. Oh, I got to get in the right page here. Okay. It says, to exercise exclusive, so Congress has authority to exercise exclusive legislation over all cases whatsoever over such districts not exceeding 10 square miles. So that's talking about Washington, D.C. As may by concession of particular states and acceptance of Congress become the seat of government of the United States, comma, and to exercise like authority, so authority like Washington, D.C., over all places purchased by the consent of the state legislature of the state, in which the same shall be for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. So let's break this down. If the federal government is to own land outside of Washington, D.C., first, they have to have consent from the state legislature. Second, they have to purchase it. And third, they can only use it for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings for military purposes. And when it says other needful, for the enumerated purposes that are found in the Constitution, such as post offices. Okay? That's it. So thank you. You're absolutely right. There is no provision in the Constitution to hold 61% of our land. They'll say that under Article 4.3.2 they have that authority, but that's for territories. All right. So now, I've got to really wrap this up quick, but you asked me to talk about taxes. Property tax in particular. Because I plan on eliminating property tax. Yeah, that's... What do you want? What's the first question that you have when I say that? Well, and then what are we? How are we going to pay for government? You know, how are you going to do that, right?
You can borrow back from Brad.
Yeah, there we go. So, I plan on, because there are legitimate, our property tax is not including in those graphs that I just showed you. Because that's what the state receives. The county receives the property tax. And they spend it on schools and, anyway, I wish I had more time, but we don't, so we gotta wrap this up. But our sheriffs, our emergency services, some roads and so forth, and some of these things that we like, some of these things that we would even say are the legitimate purposes of government, right? So how do we pay for the legitimate purposes of government and also eliminate property tax? What is the problem with property tax?
You never own.
Holding your land hostage.
That's right.
That's right. It is the state saying they own everything. And we have to pay them for it. And it doesn't matter how old you are, how young you are, you have to pay them. Just like the rest of the world before the American dream, right? And so there is a problem. And that is we need to get underneath the control and issues of property tax. I could go in and talk about how Karl Marx said that the communism can be summed up into one sentence: the abolition of private property. So right now, I'll just go through this pretty quick with you. So right now, our current property tax, the average home in Idaho is $400,000, by the way. Yeah. In the Treasure Valley, it's 540,000. But let's take this $400,000 home. The average person for that home would pay $2,000 to $3,000 in property tax, depending on what county you're from. If you total that over a 30-year period of time, you got $60,000 to $90,000 that would go to the county. Now, we could certainly have a good conversation that that's too much, right? But that's what's going on right now. That's what the county on that size of home, which is the average home right now, is paying. So, or receiving. The problem is, like we talked about, you never own your home. And people every day, especially the elderly, are losing their homes to the state. The elderly, the disabled, those who lose their job for a period of time, they're losing their homes to the state. And in fact, in the 1930s, and during the Depression, more people lost their home to the government because they couldn't pay their property tax than they did to the banks. So we've got to get over it so that we can own our homes, that we can own our property, so we can live on them without being extracted forever. So I'm proposing that we replace it with a consumption tax. I would love to just say, let's just be done with it, right? Let's not do it at all. And However, I do believe that the only moral way to tax a people is through consumption or a sales type tax type situation.
Oh, I like that.
So you have a $400,000 home, right? This is the consumption tax. When you sell that home, or when someone buys or you buy a home, you would pay a 5% tax, or it could be 3 or 4 or whatever. That would need to be worked out. But let's use 5 because it's easy math. That'd be at the time of purchase, $20,000 that could be rolled into the mortgage would go to the county for the consumption tax. And then they're done. They're taken care of. Now you owe the bank. So you set a mortgage and you pay the mortgage off. Once the mortgage is paid off, you no longer have any taxes. And so you might say, well, 20,000 is a far cry from 60 to 90,000, right? But you have to calculate in that the average home in Idaho sells 3 to 5 times in a 30-year period, which would generate $60,000 to $120,000 over that same period of time for the government. Okay, now we can certainly talk about the need to minimize that amount, but I'm showing you here. And then what is the benefit? What is the benefit to us? We own our homes, right? And I was asked a couple nights ago, well, what about those of you that have been paying for a long, long time? You know, and you're not planning on buying a new home and all of that. So probably look like about a 5-year of kind of what you're doing now, and then that's where the cutoff would be. And then if you sold your home or if you bought a new home, then this would apply, right? So again, it's extremely important that we get clear title, that we own our homes, that we restore the American dream, that we do not allow a government to be able to control and basically make it so that they can take our homes. And not only that the elderly are mostly the ones that are being devastated by this. I mean, they retire, right? They're on a limited income, and then taxes go up and up and up and up like they're doing now. And guess who loses their home? Because they just simply can't pay for it. And it's usually not like the state come and took grandma out and just threw her out on the street. That's not what happens. It's usually, grandma is like, I just can't afford this home anymore. Even though when she has it paid off. Grandpa's passed away, grandma can't pay the taxes anymore. And so she sells her home that she's lived in 45 years. That's how they're mostly losing their home. And so that needs to end. Did you have a question?
I do. I don't mean to derail you. I know you're trying to wrap up, but I do have a question that a whole group of people want the answer to.
Okay.
Can I ask you? Okay.
Yep.
So, if the conservative vote continues to be split 3 ways, we don't see any path for Brad Little to be beaten in this election cycle, and we'll all be stuck with Brad Little for the next 4 years. So, I worked on the attempt to recall him extensively. My priority is to make sure that we do not have Brad Little for another 4 years because of all these things that you're mentioning. So, I have a longtime acquaintance in this area who contacted yourself, Ed, and Janice to ask if you would be willing, all 3 of you, if you'd be willing to come together for a brainstorming session as regards having only one strong conservative candidate.
Right. And
that to many of us, that is the only path forward in beating Brad Little, which is the main objective and point. So Ed said yes with no reservations. Janice has yet to reply to my acquaintance on the subject. And the response from you or your team was yes, but with certain parameters and stipulations. And then eventually John was blocked from sending emails to your team. And I guess what I'm saying, and that has caused some people to switch, divided in support for you or Ed, to switch over to Ed. And my goal is to have one strong conservative candidate. That is my end goal. Would you be willing to meet together in a brainstorming session?
So I told John very loud and clear that I would be more than willing to meet. I told him multiple times, set up a time, make it happen. And that never happened. And so I'm not sure exactly what communication as far as cutting him off, but multiple times there was communication back and forth to John about me meeting with Ed and Janice. Now there have also been many groups that have had debates, that have hosted debates in the past. And Janice will simply not debate for whatever reason. She's refusing to debate. And Ed's been willing to debate, I've been willing to debate, but Janice won't debate because there is that concern. And I think that the people of Idaho should be able to hear the candidates, listen to their responses to very important questions, and to be able to decide for themselves who they should vote for. I think that it is essential that in order to get it to one person challenging Brad Little, that debates are involved, but she won't debate. Ed will debate, I will debate. So I don't know what the people of Idaho are going to do about that. Right here and then right here.
Hey, there's one thing that we mentioned to Ed when he was here a couple of weeks ago, and that is that the two of you ought to get together, have a debate, and put a chair there for Janice, put her name on it, and have somehow get it televised such that it can put some pressure on.
Yeah, so I've looked at Ed, talked to Ed, we've been at different events and so forth because we've been campaigning. And I think a debate with Ed and I would be really boring. I agree with you on that one. I might see it here a little bit this way, and it'd be like, I agree with you on that one. That's pretty good. So I'm willing to do that, but it's probably the world's most boring debate. And because I think Ed's a nice guy, I really do. I think he's got it, he's right. But the problem with Ed is he's nowhere prepared and nowhere had the life experience to fight the fight that's going to need to be fought.
But sir, with all due respect, it's the split of the conservative vote that is the issue. You've got to get down to one candidate that we can all get behind. Otherwise, forget it.
So there's two things. I agree with you. Okay, there's two things, but the end goal is not to just replace Brad Little.
For starters.
It's a good start, but it is not the end goal. The end goal is to secure the liberties of Idaho. That is the end goal. And if you don't do that right, by putting someone else in that won't do it, can't do it, and hasn't done it, then you haven't accomplished a whole lot. If you put another empty suit in there who's been controlled, or who is not willing to fight the fight that needs to be fought, then you haven't accomplished what needs to be accomplished. And you'll be back here 4 years again saying, we've got to get rid of this person. Right? It is essential that you put the right person in charge. And I think that a good debate to determine that, several good debates. I think having people come just like I am, and discussing these matters so that you can make a decision. But ultimately, it comes down to the people of Idaho. I'm not divided with them. I'm running as a candidate for office. It's the Idaho people that are divided. What? I am not. I have no problem talking to Janice McGeehan and Ed Humphrey. Right? The Idaho people are the ones that are divided. And then particularly the conservatives. The conservatives of Idaho are the ones that divide it.
Yes, but if they had one strong front runner as a conservative, I think they would all.
That was the whole goal of the Republican nomination. So now we're going to say, because we have the Republican primaries, right? What was the goal for the Republican primary? Come down to one. So now do we have a pre-Republican primary? Do we have a pre-Republican primary? No, the conservatives of Idaho need to get their minds in the right place. Understand what is true conservatism and what is not. Understand who is going to fight for your rights and who is not. And then get behind that person. I understand the concern. I understand that. But it can be resolved if the people of Idaho will unite, the
Yes,
conservatives
but
of
the
Idaho.
problem is, we've seen Janice do some amazing things. You were mentioning the Hardware Brewing Company. She flew out to be with them when they opened their doors against the governor's orders. So we've seen her do a lot of
Okay,
amazing
so let me explain to you. When the governor, so this is a great example. Did you hear what she just said? That Janice McGeehan, the Hardware Brewing Company that the ISP raided, Janice McGeehan went there when they opened up and said, we're going to open up. And she got her picture taken with Raul Labrador and 2 other elected representatives. And they blasted it all over. We're here at the Hardware Brewing Company, and we're showing the governor that we're going to stay open. And she got her picture taken. Well, guess what that did for Brad Little? That was the motivation that put the target on the Hardware Brewing Company. And he's saying, the lieutenant governor is going public, national public against me. And he sent ISP in after him. But the most amazing thing is this. Who did the owners of the Hardware Brewing Company call when ISP came in and raided them and they were afraid for their own lives, their own business, and so forth? Who did they call? Who did they call? They called Ammon Bundy. And who organized hundreds of people to come and be at their business. You see the difference? That is the truth. And Janice loves a picture. And that's fine, politicians do.
She's a politician.
She loves the 5-hour emergency order that or a suspension of Brad Little's order that she puts in place while Brad Little's gone. But after 5 hours, it means nothing. She gets a lot of headlines. And so we have to, I agree, but the Idaho people have to unite. I will do all I can to expose what's happening and to, share these things that I've shared with you, but ultimately it's your decision. And I believe that my duty from God is to give